Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of the show. Today, bringing another really awesome guest for you involved in science, technology, biotech, creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by Dave Rosa, who is President and Chief Executive Officer of NeuroOne. They are a development stage medical technology company. They're focused on developing these high definition, minimally invasive thin film electrodes for the both the diagnosis and treatment of various neurologic conditions. And they have therapeutic focuses in epilepsy and chronic pain, and sort of broadly the fast-growing neurostimulation market. Mr. Rosa is an entrepreneur with over 3 decades of experience in the medical device and medtech industry, spanning a wide range of technologies and products. In addition to CEO roles with various early stage companies, he has had senior roles at places like C.R. Bard, Boston Scientific, St. Jude Medical, and his responsibilities have included everything from marketing to product development to business development. He's been named on inventor on multiple medical device patents and has served on many boards and raised over $200 million in the capital markets for these various ventures. He did his MBA at Duquesne, his undergraduate degree right over here in engineering commerce from Drexel University. And we're honored to have him with us. A lot of really cool topics to get into today that we don't normally touch on. But Dave Rosa, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
And thanks for having me. Although after hearing I've spent more than 3 decades, I'm definitely feeling much older.
Me too. We'll talk about that offline.
Yeah.
It's great having you, Dave, and I really do look forward to getting to all things neuroscience and med tech. But before we do any of that, I mean, I would just love to hand things over to you for a couple minutes to talk a little more about you. As I mentioned, you did your MBA, you studied engineering, and it was sort of with the exception of a couple of years at Westinghouse and this really interesting company I was checking out where you were increasing the dairy efficiencies of cows. You really got fast and furious into med tech, and I would just love to hear what got you there to begin with and why you found a sort of sweet spot in this space.
Yeah, so probably like most kids in college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I had some family members who had backgrounds in chemical engineering. So I started in chemical engineering, quickly realized I hated chemistry, pivoted to electrical engineering, graduated with a degree in electrical engineering, and then went to work for Westinghouse. But, I would say even dating back into high school, I was always fascinated with medical technology. And really, that's where my passion was. And quickly realized after a few failed years developing power transformers at Westinghouse that I was really going to pursue what my love was, and that was the medical field. So that's more or less, I literally woke up one day and said, I'm going to pursue the medical field and do whatever I need to do to get into that industry. Sent out a lot of flyers to, companies that probably everyone listening to this would recognize. And the one that gave me the first shot was Stryker. Mm-hmm. And since I had a number of physical ailments from sports, even at the young age of 22. The orthopedics industry was really appealing for me. And I started my career selling for Stryker. So that's kind of what led me to that. And after a few successful years there, I realized that my heart was also more on the strategic side as opposed to the sales side. Although I loved working with customers to solve problems, patient problems. I realized that I enjoyed much more the strategic side of it, and that's what led me to marketing, and then increased roles from there.
Awesome, awesome. And to sort of start out, and again, these are some themes that we have not touched on the show yet, so going to be a little hand holding here. But before we get into sort of as I mentioned, the really cool stuff that you're developing in terms of the high definition, minimally invasive thin film technologies and all that, you found in doing this, I mean, you found a replacement and technologies that had a significant advantage over the traditional stuff that exists, which falls into this class of C, or Stereoelectroencephalography, which is sort of the minimally invasive technology that has been used but has a lot of limitations. And I was wondering, before we get into everything that NeuroOne has developed and sort of shrinking this down and making a lot more useful and beneficial, introduce the audience to SEEG or C and sort of its current place out there in sort of the med tech world and dealing with various neurological indications.
Sure. So I kind of fell into NeuroOne. I was actually helping a couple of the founders really put together a strategic plan in their early days. And, what I really saw here was an industry that reminded me of the cardiovascular industry. And I had spent probably like 20 years in the cardiovascular industry. And, we probably all have heard the stories of relatives who have had bypass surgery where, they have these really invasive scars, from the breastbone all the way down. And they literally use a retractor to gain access to the heart. So really, these were very, very invasive procedures. And what happened over time was it was really replaced with less invasive procedures, starting with what I'll call port, so smaller incision holes to access the heart, to eventually, all of us probably have family members who have had a stent placed. And, those procedures are done through placing a needle stick and a small wire all the way up into the arteries of the heart. And what I saw in the neurosurgery space, specifically the brain, were procedures that reminded me of 20 years prior in the cardiovascular space, where they were literally removing the entire top part of the skull to gain access. And that had just a number of issues, ranging from infections to psychological issues. And I'll describe that. So it was probably one of my first industry meetings that I went to in brain surgery. And there was a whole session dedicated to the psychological impact of brain surgery. And, I thought, wow, this is going to be kind of interesting. And during that hour, they showed photos of teenagers. So when you start talking about epilepsy, which was the initial indication, we targeted, what was happening with these patients is just to do the diagnostic procedure, they would remove the top part of the skull, put electrodes that are film-based that look more like this, and they place them all over the surface of the brain. After about a week of hopefully finding the areas of the brain that were triggering the seizure, they would remove the devices, put the top part of the skull back on the patient, and then send them home. Well, it's a very invasive procedure. You have a higher rate of infections doing things that way. And then the pictures in this presentation were, they were just chilling. So epilepsy, half of the patients that have it are teenagers or infants, in that range. So we're talking about a young population that's probably more concerned with, their cosmetic looks than maybe, someone in their 70s. But what you saw were literally in the areas around the skull where the bone healed, you would have these ridges in the skull. And you can imagine, a teenage girl, 16 years old, who wants to go to the prom, having this noticeable physical deformity. So there were many parents who really would not allow their young children to go through that type of surgery because they felt it was just too invasive, too risky. So many of these patients, unfortunately, weren't treated. And then what happened was really the advent of SEEG. So I'm going to show my little model here. Hopefully you can see this.
Yep.
If you look at the top part of the skull, what we're talking about are holes that are about a millimeter in size. And unlike traditional surgery, where they had to remove the top part of the skull, everyone knew you had brain surgery. Everyone knew, the top part of your skull was removed. It was a long healing process. Well, you could go in for a procedure like this, and assuming they were able to quickly identify the problem areas in the brain that were triggering seizures, you could be home the next day and no one would ever know that you had brain surgery. And not to mention that there are a number of centers that won't even shave a patient's skull. So, again, females are a lot more resistant to that happening. So you would literally leave with, a number of tiny holes in the skull, but just a more acceptable way of doing things because it's less invasive. There are fewer adverse events, especially associated with infection from it. So really the development of this type of procedure was really important to gain more acceptance with parents even being willing to bring their children in for this type of procedure.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to, and again, I'm going to speak out of turn here, but when we drill down on the NeuroOne Evo SEG electrode system, which integrates micron scale polyimide thin films and a much higher density of the probes, and it's flexible. I think you got a lot of other stuff there behind you, but again, you take us from where you're just explaining again with SEG to a little bit of what we're talking about here with NeuroOne's tool.
Yeah, so maybe a good way to answer that is to really describe why I was so interested in NeuroOne when I honestly initially had no intentions of joining the company. And really the excitement here started with doctors at the Mayo Clinic. So the company had in place an agreement, a partnership with the Mayo Clinic and the University of Wisconsin. And I got to spend quite a bit of time with the doctors at the Mayo Clinic. I mean, our office is probably about an hour and 15-minute drive. I made a number of visits there to talk to the neurologists and neurosurgeons. And that's probably where I learned the most about epilepsy and what the challenges were. And it really was about invasiveness. So the existing technologies were not very flexible. They were very thick. And really what the physicians were looking to really solve was the invasiveness issue, because I still remember Dr. Greg Worrell of the Mayo Clinic telling me really the most underutilized procedure that he felt as a neurologist was epilepsy surgery. So the idea here was, can you take a very thin film technology and maybe roll it up into a tiny little tube, and instead of having to remove the entire top part of the skull, we would make like a quarter-sized hole, and then thread this through because of its thinness, which doctors were not able to do, with other existing commercially available systems. So really, the first thing that excited me was the fact that you could probably place these devices less invasively. But the second one was the ability to use this type of technology to perform more than just the diagnostic procedure. So, at the time I joined NeuroOne, really the standard of care was remove the top part of the skull, place these electrodes, over the area of the brain that you wanted to monitor. And then after you were done with the diagnostic part, after you had found the areas that were triggering the seizures, what would happen is they would remove all the devices, put the skull back on, send the patient home, and then schedule them for a second surgery to remove that tissue. And in those days, it was primarily through literally using a scalpel. And, I mentioned that, neurosurgery seemed to me, when I joined the company, to be 20 years behind where interventional cardiology was and cardiac surgery. And I remember asking the Dr. Jamie Van Gompel, the neurosurgeon at the Mayo Clinic, I said to him, like, why do you use a scalpel? Why not use a therapy like RF ablation, like they use in the heart for atrial fibrillation? And I remember him saying to me, Dave, these things are on the horizon, but we're probably, 20 to 30 years behind where, cardiology and cardiac surgery are today. So I saw a lot of parallels there. And I thought, gosh, why not offer a technology? Could we develop this technology to not only perform the diagnostic part, but then using the same device, use it to actually treat the patient, whether it's with an ablation, whether it's with drug delivery or stimulation. Let's bring the patient in one time, perform this procedure minimally invasively. It's better for the patient. There's less risk. It's better for the surgeon. You don't have to schedule two different surgeries and occupy the operating room twice when quite possibly you could do this all in one procedure, one hospitalization. So that's what the exciting part of this was. And when I was doing my own diligence and talking to really all the experts from a technology perspective, I learned that, there was the capability to do that. There were no devices currently that could perform both diagnostic and therapeutic functions. So I was really excited with the potential, because I thought this could be so much better for the patient. And I really saw it as, everybody likes to talk about, platform technologies, but I really felt like this could be a platform that could treat a number of neurological disorders by providing, both diagnostic and therapeutic functions.
And before we drill down on some of the, and I'll throw sort of the theranostic applications, could you just say a couple words about the FDA 510 clearance? Because I know there's a paper in Frontiers in Neuroscience, this was April 2022, about the biocompatibility testing, and basically you showed that this thing is totally clean in the sense, you went through everything, no cytotoxicity, no mutagenicity, no immune cell accumulation, necrosis, neovascular. You basically showed that this thing is beautiful in terms of, how it compares biocompatibly to everything else, and nothing odd showed up. So could you just talk about the 510, and then they'll move into the theranostic stuff.
Sure. So in my days in the cardiovascular world, I had certain technologies that I was working with that required a much more rigorous regulatory process with the FDA. They refer to them as PMAs. There's usually long clinical trials that are required, follow-up that's required. You have to demonstrate safety and efficacy. This requires, I'm going to throw out an average number, 7 years from the time that you start until the time that you're likely to gain an FDA clearance. That includes just the length of the trial and follow-up, and then the FDA's review. And there's a lot of risk in that, right? There's a lot of risk for the company, for investors. And in today's world versus 20, 30 years ago, there's less of an appetite for risk. So the second part of that is you could dedicate, your entire career on one technology, and get to the finish line and find out that you didn't prove what you set out to prove, and all that time, unfortunately, is for naught. Patients don't get the benefit of the therapy, even if there's evidence that it is helpful. So I was really interested, especially as I get older, in really finding technologies that could utilize a 510K path, which is, let's just say, a much more predictable path that usually has timelines that are,
Yep.
I'll say, on average, 4 to 6 months from the time of submission. The challenge there is to be able to convince the FDA that what you're submitting to them is similar to something else that they've provided clearance for. So, it's a careful or a fine line between, trying to promote differences with your technology without pushing yourself into a much more rigorous and time-consuming and expensive regulatory path. So we have been able, with every technology we have, to convince FDA that we are similar to other technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And in one case, the most recent one, where we were able to get both an indication for diagnostics and therapeutics, our strategy was, which was a strategy that I've utilized successfully on the cardiovascular side, was to first, in this case, get the diagnostic clearance from FDA, and then go back to them with data demonstrating that the same technology could also be effective under a separate 510K for therapeutic purposes. And fortunately, we were successful in doing that, and really have used that as the model for any other submissions that we've made with FDA. The most recent one being utilizing this technology to ablate a nerve in the face that causes tremendous pain, facial pain for patients. So it's a model that's worked well for us, and that we expect to continue to utilize as we pursue some of these other indications.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, you've been mentioning the many therapeutic applications in the sense that, okay, this does the diagnostic, but then at the same time you can you can go down either path of ablation, where we're destroying a tissue we don't want, as in the case of epilepsy, or stimulation, and we'll get a little into the neuromodulation theme. Could you again say a couple words again for our audience that may be less familiar here? What sort of, in both cases, you're delivering some type of energy source, whether that's electricity or ultrasound, whatever. In your particular case with Evo, the one RF system, what is the sort of the energy component of that? If you could just talk a little bit about that, because I guess in ablation and neuromodulation, it's maybe similar, but the way you do it is literally. Take us down that path as well.
Yeah, it's really two different ways of treating pain, and I'm not referring to epilepsy in this case. I'm referring more to pain management.
Yep.
So in some cases, like facial pain, we're ablating the nerve so that the patients no longer feel pain. But in other areas like back pain, low back pain, we're stimulating the area, to treat the pain. So it really is two different methods of addressing lower back pain that are really due to different reasons. Back pain is one of those areas where, if you could ever solve lower back pain, and I'm a person that suffered with lower back pain and have had multiple surgeries for really the last 20 plus years, but it's a complicated issue. And when you're able to identify a patient's pain, say, for example, it's due to sciatic nerve pain, then there's more established effective ways of treating that. Or if it's due to a nerve called, like, for example, the basivertebral nerve, you can ablate that nerve to treat lower back pain associated with that. But sciatic nerve pain, there's been studies, and look, the market today is estimated for stimulation for lower back pain to be more than $3 billion. So there's a lot of patients that are benefiting from it. But, we believe, based on feedback that we have from really the pain specialists who primarily treat these conditions, that there's still some improvements that need to be made. It's like most mature markets. As more and more players enter, you typically get less and less differentiation, and then it becomes more your success due to either pricing or relationships. And any area that we get into, if we can't if we can't improve upon the therapy and the technology, we're not going to be in it. So really the premise of lower back pain was, can we leverage the use of RF energy, radio frequency energy, which is basically heat, and can we burn the nerve, destroy the nerve to eliminate pain, and using this same electrode platform that we're using for other applications. And the answer is yes. So the company, we made the determination 3 years ago to go out and develop our own RF box, which could deliver RF energy through the electrode, in addition to the electrode being used for diagnostic purposes. And RF energy is well understood.
Sure.
It's well understood in the brain. It's well understood in the spine. It's well understood in the heart. So it's not that we were inventing a new way of basically destroying the nerve associated with pain. We were doing it really with a different delivery mechanism, these electrodes, that have inherent benefits to it over existing technology.
And when we look, obviously, what you're very successful in the anti-epileptic area, and then as you're pointing out, pain, and depending on what type of pain, whether we ablate or whether we stimulate, another huge market opportunity. Clearly, there's so much that could potentially fall into this therapeutic basket, whether it's ablating brain tumor, brain metastasis. And we've talked a lot about glioblastoma on the show and some of these really hard to treat cancers. Obviously, in sort of the neurostimulation place, we hear about everything from, psychiatric disorders and depression to ultimately how we can deal with memory and cognitive disorders like dementia. Where's all this going for NeuroOne? I mean, clearly you have a huge potential here in many directions, but could you take us a little bit of where things are headed in the coming years?
Yeah, it's interesting. Just about everything you mentioned are areas that we've looked at. And I'm going to talk about one because I find it really fascinating first, although we were not necessarily pursuing an indication for this today. But, you talked about cognitive disorders, memory issues, short-term memory issues that many patients suffer from. There was a small study done at the Mayo Clinic. So going back years ago when, I was meeting on a frequent basis the neurologists and neurosurgeons at the Mayo Clinic, we actually had a discussion about improving short-term memory. And they actually conducted a small study. And these were patients that were going to have surgery because they all had brain tumors. But what the Mayo really wanted to study was the impact of stimulation in the brain, and the potential to improve short-term memory. So none of these patients had short-term memory issues. I think the average age was somewhere around 50 years old. And again, all of them were going to have brain surgery to remove these tumors. So what they did was they placed electrodes that looked like this on the surface of the brain. And what they did was, for each patient, while they were in their room being monitored, a clinical coordinator put a laptop computer in front of the patient and said, I'm going to read, I think it was 15 words. And I'm going to read the word, and then you're going to see it on your laptop. And once I'm done, I think it was 45 seconds to a minute, we're going to ask you to write down all the words that you could remember. And then we're going to do it all over again using different words. And the difference between, and they varied, what they did first here, but the difference between the first set of words and the second was, in one of those cases, after reading the word, they delivered a little bit of stimulation to the brain. So they would read the word and then stimulate the brain, read the next word, stimulate the brain. And there was no doubt that at the end of the study, delivering stimulation, just short bursts of stimulation to the surface of the brain, improved, and it was statistically significant, improved the patient's short-term memory. So, I think it's a fascinating area that someday, we will see devices that could probably, help patients that have Alzheimer's and short-term memory loss through stimulation. We need to get these therapies even less invasive than they are today, because it's still, a major surgery to implant these devices. But look, there's stimulation. It's like this magic pill that could be used for so many different things. And I believe someday it'll be used for things like depression, as well as short-term memory loss. But as it pertains for NeuroOne and where we're going, again, what we're interested in is making an impact today in the short term by being able to offer improved technology that really solves some of the issues that are still there today. And if you want to talk about pain, and an area that you've mentioned that we're involved in, let's talk about lower back pain. And what I'd like to do is maybe explain how it's treated today, and then show you what we feel we can bring to the table, because this is an area of great interest. I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's generating over $3 billion of revenue. Companies like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Abbott, and Globus, all major players in the space. And really the whole premise behind spinal cord stimulation for lower back pain is, so if you have sciatic nerve pain, obviously you're going to feel the pain travel up or travel down your leg. And it's very well understood as to what causes it. And spinal cord stimulation has been very effective at treating lower back pain, basically pain that is derived below the waist. And the way stimulation works is, when they place the devices, is as the pain signal travels from the leg up to the brain, what stimulation does is it blocks that signal from those neurons from ever communicating with the brain that that you're experiencing pain. So today, what they do is, in addition to placing a device that looks like a pacemaker, it's a little mini stimulator. Hopefully the audience can see this. This is like a very thin wire-like device that has metal on it that allows you to transmit stimulation down to the spinal cord. The limitation of devices like this is it's hard to see, but there's metal bands. Essentially, you might be able to see like little white spaces on here, or little white sections, and that's where the metal is, and it's circumferential. So if I place that on the spinal cord, and I stimulate, you're generating stimulation in a 360-degree range. Whereas what you're really trying to do is deliver the stimulation straight down to the spinal cord. One of the things that we've done is develop a technology. Now, this is not the actual device, but it's similar. So this is a film, right? Well, if I put both of these in front of you and said, which one do you think provides more stimulation? You would probably say, well, this one's bigger, so it's going to probably provide more stimulation? And the answer is it does. The problem is that as companies have tried to deliver this, it's always required a surgical incision to place this device. Now, patients, again, going back to the analogy of cardiac surgery, where you're cracking open the chest versus placing a wire in through the femoral artery, patients don't want incisions. And pain specialists, who are primarily anesthesiologists, they're used to placing wires, right? They want to be able to place a device within 5 minutes, which is how long it takes them to place one of these devices. So if you can do that, then there's an interest level. So what we've been able to do is develop this technology so that you can roll it up into a small tube and feed it through the same needle that they're placing this device through, to, in essence, to provide a greater area of stimulation. The second challenge is that has really plagued the industry is high energy consumption. Again, when you're stimulating in a 360-degree area, you have energy going in all different areas when you really want the energy facing downward. And because these film sit on the spinal cord like this, very flat, all the energy is being transmitted downward towards the spinal cord. So you don't have to use as much power. Devices like this are using, anywhere from 30 to 40% less energy. What's the benefit to the patient? You don't have to recharge your batteries as often. And that becomes a very, very annoying situation and issue for patients. They would love, to only need to recharge these maybe once a month or even longer. So using less energy, for sure, a benefit. And what that equates to is not only having to recharge less, but having to replace the battery less frequently. And these batteries today, I'll just give a ballpark. Every couple of years, you've got to go in and have the battery replaced. That's a surgical procedure. And if you can delay that and extend that, by years, it's also beneficial. The other common issue that comes up with patients that get spinal cord stimulation is you'll hear things like, over time, it doesn't seem to have or offer the same amount of pain relief. Things change in the body. The body becomes used to the therapy, or at least that's the thought. So then the question is there a way to kind of more precisely dial in the therapy, but also have the ability to change the way you're stimulating over time? So if you go back and you look at a device like this that has, all these contacts, what a technology like ours can do is it can allow the doctor to configure the stimulation through, instead of stimulating through all of these contacts, is to pick, through trial and error with the patient. They might say, well, we're only going to stimulate through these 4 contacts, right, that are at the end here, because that seems to provide very effective pain relief for the patient. So why stimulate throughout the entire body of the device when you don't need to? Whereas maybe 6 months later, a year later, the patient's starting to experience additional pain. You could stimulate through other contacts on that, and you may find that stimulating through other contacts that you weren't utilizing before solves the problem. So maybe to summarize, can you provide more stimulation but deliver it percutaneously without an incision? We feel the answer to that is yes with our technology. Can you reduce battery consumption? We feel you can. Traditionally, these larger electrodes that are placed surgically have shown that. And then, the third one is, can you really specialize the therapy that really provides the greatest pain relief instead of just stimulating through the entire device? So that's what we feel we bring to the table, and we're very late in the development of this technology, but we've already been able to demonstrate in cadaver models and animal models that you can place this percutaneously and accomplish what I just described. And it doesn't mean this type of electrode couldn't be used in other areas of the body. We can change the shape, the size. We have a lot of flexibility. It's very easy to do that. But we chose back pain because it is the largest market today for pain management for stimulation purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so that's what we kind of bring to the table today in pain management. And then you kind of gently touched on drug delivery. I think you mentioned glioblastomas.
Right, and the blood-brain barrier issues. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
about, because there we're not dealing with neurons, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on where this is all going for that.
So this is fascinating, and I can tell you that everything I've described up to now, we were really attempting to accomplish when I joined the company. And they all carry a risk. I think the majority of the risk as to can you do that? We've either checked the box in the brain already to demonstrate we can, and we're getting closer for pain management. Drug delivery was, again, what else can we leverage this technology for? And the idea here was, look, today, and I'll use epilepsy because it's a great example. If you're talking about the toolbox that neurosurgeons have and neurologists have to treat these patients today, they always start with drugs. And we know that 1/3 of patients, their epilepsy cannot be managed with drugs. So that's over 1 million patients. Yet there's still resistance to have a surgical procedure, right? So if I said to you, like, look, pharmaceuticals don't help your situation. So what we're going to do is likely do one of two things. We're either going to put a device in, like this device here, and we're first going to find the problem area. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to burn some of your brain tissue to solve this problem. You'd probably say, wow, that sounds pretty serious. I don't know if I want to sign up to have part of my brain tissue destroyed. Well, the other option is, maybe we can't find, maybe it isn't triggered your seizures from one area of the brain. So the other option that they have is to place a device like a pacemaker. And what we're going to do is what we were talking about doing in the spine. We're going to put, not we, but neurosurgeons can put a stimulator in the skull and permanent electrodes like this. And they can stimulate your brain to really try to distract the brain from seizing up. Well, if you found out that, if the ablation doesn't work, if I'm even willing to do that, now the other option is I got to have this permanent implant, and you're going to stimulate my brain for the rest of my life. You're probably not going to like that either. So is there another tool that we can give neurologists and neurosurgeons to treat these conditions that aren't destroying tissue, even though it's extremely effective, or putting in a permanent implant? It's what if we could take one or two of these devices, make a tiny hole, and then deliver a medication to the exact spot that's triggering this and be done with it, hopefully forever. There's going to be patients that opt for that. Now, if you talk to any neurosurgeons or neurologists who are actively participating in these gene therapy or cell therapy trials today, the ones that I've spoken to have said, look, we think these therapies will be effective, but not as effective as like literally removing the brain tissue, whether it's through a scalpel or whether it's through RF ablation or even through stimulation. they're probably not going to be as effective. They're going to be extremely expensive. And then, the patient, the relief from seizures may not be as effective, as those other therapies, but it's probably the least invasive, the least intimidating. It's like getting an injection in your arm. The only difference is, we're going to do it in the brain. So the idea here was, can we provide another tool in the toolbox that these physicians have to treat these types of conditions? And we think the answer is yes. But there are devices available today that can deliver these therapies into the brain that are being used in clinical studies. So the question is like, well, what does a technology like this offer that isn't already available today? So number one, whenever you're talking about learning curves with new therapies, there's always a learning curve for, it doesn't really matter what type of physician we're talking about. If you're already using our technology to find the focal area of the brain triggering seizures, or you're already using it to also ablate, if you now are going to be using that therapy to deliver some sort of gene or cell therapy, you already have experience with it. So you don't need to learn to do anything differently with the actual device itself. And what we're going to provide you with is a connector that allows you to connect tubing to a syringe and a drug pump. And, those are already established devices today. Everybody, all these physicians have used syringes or drug pumps at some point. But the actual device utilization is going to be quite similar, other than you're going to be pushing a therapy through the center of that. So the learning curve with this should be much less for neurosurgeons, who are going to be the ones that are delivering any of these brain-related neurological issues. The second one is, and especially when you start thinking about a pharmaceutical company developing these, how do they measure efficacy? Is there a tool that is available to them that can not only find the area that's impacting the brain, deliver the drug, but then is there a tool that you can also use to evaluate efficacy? Well, if you remember, these devices were initially developed to find the problem area in the brain. So once the device is in place, once you've found that area, and then once you've delivered that therapy, these devices also are constantly and continuously recording brain activity. So if the baseline is a patient who's having seizures, what you're going to see are spikes every time a seizure occurs. And when the seizure is over, you'll see a more normalized, closer to a horizontal line showing that, there's no seizures occurring. What this device will do is again, record a baseline reading, but also after that therapy has been delivered, it will continue to record. And if you see any evidence of even slight seizure activity, which patients may not even have symptoms for, it's a very sensitive technology, and it's able to pick up what some neurosurgeons have referred to as pre-seizure activity. Yep. So the ability to not only find the problem, deliver the therapy, and then monitor it. And many of these companies have told us that they expect to see changes, especially if it's positive, within about 3 weeks' time. Well, when we got clearance from the FDA initially for these devices, we were able to receive clearance for up to 30-day use. So we know these devices can record, up to a month. And if you expect to see changes, in that within that 30 days, clearly this technology would be able to, to do that. And then I would say the last thing that I think we bring to the table that no one else can today for gene and cell therapies is many of these pharmaceutical companies start with rodent models. So when they're first testing it, It's very cheap, to be able to procure mice or rat models to test the therapy on. The problem is that there isn't a tool that you can use for that model, and then a larger animal model, and then eventually the human model. So there's definitely value in being able to use the same tool to both deliver the therapy and monitor the therapy, so that you're not introducing any new variables along the way. I don't have these, and it would be hard for you to see them, but we've been able to downsize this device
Okay.
so that you can use it in mice, you can use it in larger animals and humans as well. And that also brings a lot of value to these companies as they're developing their therapies. So that's really what we bring to the table. Now, you also mentioned glioblastomas, which is, completely different area. And maybe if I could talk for a few minutes on,
Sure.
how these patients are treated today, and then how they might benefit from, this type of therapy. So today, if you've got a glioblastoma, you're going to go into the hospital. They're going to remove that. But the issue for these patients, unfortunately, is that there's always, I'll refer to them as remnants, but additional areas that cannot of the tumor that cannot be removed.
Right.
And there's pretty much a standard therapy where once the tumor is removed, they'll put in these little wafers that have radioactive material, and they place them in the brain, leave them in the brain. And the unfortunate part is that because it's pretty much standardized therapy, you're impacting both healthy brain tissue as well as what these various strands of cancerous tissue are.
Mm-hmm.
So the thought is there a way to precisely surround just the tumorous parts of the tissue and deliver very fine, precise doses only to the area, so that you're minimizing any adverse effects to healthy brain tissue? And, I'm going to pull my patient in here. So this is a way that it could be used. There's probably more devices than need to be, but let's just say there's areas where each of these electrodes are placed that have still remnants of the cancer.
Mm-hmm.
You could literally attach this. There's only one drug today that is indicated for use in the ventricle of the brain for tumors, but you could precisely deliver that through this, so that you're only targeting those areas, and that you're not, in essence, blasting, both healthy as well as tumorous tissue. And then the idea would be, after the dose was given, you could put these patients in an MRI to really see, okay, are we shrinking those other areas of the tumor? Do we need to deliver more? Is it just in certain areas? So it's a way to really individualize the therapy, instead of just saying, like, we're just going to, dose as much of this cancer drug as we can in the brain to hopefully, get the balance of the tumor.
Mm-hmm.
You clearly, oncology neurosurgeons don't want to do that. They would love a tool to be able to really precisely target that. And, we believe that, this device is all about precision, right? It's about
Right.
finding the area in the brain that's causing seizures, as well as potentially tumors.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we feel we could offer really better therapy for patients today,
Mm-hmm.
instead of using just standards that have been there for years that may not be optimal.
Yeah, and I love the again the intersection between everything you're doing and sort of the old school therapeutics that have their benefits, but again it's finding the convergence, which is that's a hot that's a hot term for all this, and I think it's exactly where you're placing yourself, and I'm excited. I'm really excited about everything you're saying here, Dave, and it's going to be really interesting how some of these indications evolve. But what else should we be on the lookout for in terms of you and NeuroOne? I know that you were out in LA a couple of weeks ago at the Congress of Neurologic Surgeons. You've been at some medtech investment conferences recently. What, as we get into 2026, should we be on the lookout for in terms of whether it's on the company side or other scientific advancements that they're going to be public facing in the coming months?
Yeah, so one of the areas that I'm always sensitive about, and I brought this up earlier, is being able to get these therapies as quickly as possible, to patients and doctors. And it's hard to do that when you're a relatively small company. Your resources aren't as great as larger companies. So one of the things that we've been spending quite a bit of time on is potential partnerships.
Yep.
And what all those partnerships bring is something that we don't have. So in the case of spinal cord stimulation, if I had to develop our own stimulator, I would have to bring on hardware, software, employees. I would have to do a fairly large clinical trial. I'd have to do follow-up. But if I partner with a company that already has an FDA clearance in that space, what we would be able to do is do a much smaller study in that partnership that would allow us to get this flexible electrode to the market years faster. And I could give examples with other technology that we're working on as well that we've talked about, where a partnership could really accelerate our ability potentially, to get a clearance. So I think, to answer your question, I think 2026, I think you should be on the lookout for partnerships that accelerate our ability to get these therapies into patients' hands and surgeons' hands much quicker than if we were going to do it ourselves. So that's really I would say my primary objective in 2026 is to accelerate, and it could be even expanding partnerships that we have now. Today, we have a partnership with Zimmer Biomet.
Yep.
There's they have interest in some of the other things we're working on as well. So it might be, to take advantage of existing partnerships to, again, help us accelerate not only the ability to get these devices quickly to the market, but also as broadly as possible.
It's going to be some exciting years for you guys. I mean, it's an amazing portfolio, a very elegant, again, regulatory situation that you've created there for the company, and it's going to be really great to see how these opportunities, come off the assembly line and get to patients. But really great stuff. I'm excited for you, and again, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Dave Rosa, President and Chief Executive Officer of NeuroOne, doing really amazing things to, as they say, usher in this next frontier of neurology. Dave, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, to walk us through some really complicated technologies and make them very simple for us to understand. Obviously, thank you for everything you do for patients. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people via what you're developing there. Really awesome story.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity today. I greatly appreciate it.
Really, really great discussion.